Hello, everybody. This is the Chocolate News Podcast. I'm your co-host, John Alexander Reese.
And I'm your co-host, Andrea Carter.
And if you did not know, the Cincinnati Herald has been around since 1955 and is the leading African American owned newspaper in the greater Cincinnati area and northern Kentucky area. So, how's it going, Andrea?
It's going fine, John. I mean, the weather is getting a little warm out there. It's really, I'm keeping busy with work and keeping busy with all the volunteer stuff that I'm going into, and I'm really getting excited because at the end of this week is the Invest in Neighborhood Summit. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of the community councils and the neighborhoods come together to talk about various issues. Classical Roots is this weekend, and that's going to be interesting. And then then next weekend, Opera Goes to Church is on Monday. And then what I'm really looking forward to, remember the soloists that performed at Harry and Meghan's wedding, Sheku?
Yeah, yeah.
He is going to be in Cincinnati next week on April 26th and 27th, performing with the CSL. And I cannot wait to see him. He is an outstanding performer and he's very personable from what I've been told. And he is so talented. And he just released his first album too. But I'll tell you more about that when it happens. But I'm really, really excited because I'm having a busy week and all these activities are happening. And I'm looking forward to talking about issues, enjoying some art, and just having a great time this weekend in Cincinnati. So, yay.
Yeah. And we also have a special guest with us today, Noah O'Brien, and he's the VP of the West End Community Council. How's it going, sir?
It's great. Thanks for having me, and thanks for having a forum to talk about Cincinnati issues.
Of
Well, thank you,
course.
Noah, for being joining us today.
Now before we get into that, we have some chocolate news to cover. So, Andrea, what is the chocolate news of the week?
You know what? It's been an interesting week for chocolate news, and I'm going to start off with a sad event. OJ Simpson died. He has been such a tortured, towering figure in American pop culture, because you think about, here's this guy accused of killing his wife and a friend, and then you think about the trial and everything else, and he just impacted American life so much. I mean, I remember when it was announced that he died, which is so sad. He had let me start off with this. He had a battle with cancer. He was 76, and he was a great football player. He was an okay actor, but he was very personable. He was that larger than life type of guy. But I will always remember him as, who remembers where they were when the chase occurred, when he was running from the cops and he was in that white Jeep truck driving down the highway, and everyone was pulling over to let him drive down the road, and until he stopped at his house, and then he was taken into custody. That's one of those events that you sort of remember, like, were you there when the first man stepped on the moon, or were you there when the space shuttle exploded, or were you there when Obama got elected, or were you there when George Bush the father got elected, then George Bush his son got elected? I mean, all those historical events, where were you? So that's how I'm always going to remember OJ Simpson.
Well, I want to correct you a little bit. It was that white Ford Bronco that he was driving on the highway.
I knew I was going to get that wrong. I knew it. I knew it. At least I got it was white. That part I
Yeah,
got correct.
yeah.
So I forgot
Um,
it was a Ford Bronco.
yeah,
Ooh,
it was a Ford Bronco, and that car is actually going to be sold, actually. So,
really? It's still
yeah,
around? Oh my God.
it is still around. So that should be interesting to see how much that car sells for.
It's kind of like there are two events, historical events, that I remember where I was in or part of a news story watching that event. And OJ Simpson, when that car chase occurred, I was working for a newspaper in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and I was on the night shift, and all of a sudden we had a shout from one of the copy editors saying, "Oh my God, you got to look at this!" And we were all standing around, supposed to be writing stories, and we were watching the car chase. And I always will remember that. And because in the trial, I then left that newspaper and moved to Shreveport, Louisiana. and that's a whole nother issue. But it's just one of those lasting impressions. And then the other news story was the when 9/11 occurred.
Mm.
It occurred in the morning, but that was the same day as the first mayoral primary race that ever occurred in Cincinnati under the new structure, the strong mayor structure that we now have. And so I was with a group of news reporters watching the coverage about 9/11 as we were waiting for the results to come in down at the Board of Election. So those are that two events that I always remember part of the news story or in a newsroom setting for historical events. But anyway, that's enough about OJ Simpson.
Yeah.
Second up, an interesting thing occurred at Paramount Pictures. Courtney D. Armstrong has been named the chief operating officer for the studio. And I believe, is he the first Black person to be elevated like that for a
I bel
Hollywood studio?
You know what? Well, I'm not sure about any other Hollywood studio, but I believe maybe it's a first for Paramount, which is very interesting because it's like I know Paramount's like in an interesting position right now because they're about to be sold to oh, I'm trying to think what was the guy's name? Whoever owns Skydance Pictures, he's the son of Larry Ellison. I can't remember his name, David Ellison, right now. So
Oh,
I'm glad that he got the position though.
yeah. I mean, it's being a CEO of a company. It's almost like he's that close to CEO. So I
Yeah,
mean, he's in all of the business affairs. He's legal. He's doing it all. So I mean,
yeah.
it's exciting. Congratulations to him.
Oh yeah,
Um,
because he's coming from Warner Brothers, and he's been executive there since 2003. So during his Warner Brothers time, he saw like all over all the DC movies, the Harry Potter movies, Christopher Nolan movies. So he's got an impressive resume. So good for him.
I mean, also on top of the Fantastic Beasts movies, which I totally love.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, it's just he oversaw Ocean 8.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, they need to do another one of those. Anyway, moving on. Unfortunately, it's kind of sad. He only lasted 3 months, but the surprise announcement of Reverend Frederick D. Haynes III, who was appointed president and CEO of the Rainbow Push Coalition 3 months ago, tendered his resignation immediately. There was not a reason really given why he stepped down, but he just said it was effective immediately. He was still pastor of his church in Dallas, Texas, and he vows that he still work for on behalf of the Black community and social justice issues, but he stepped down. There was no reason given other than that the Rainbow Push Coalition is going to have to look for a new leader, especially since Jesse Jackson is pulling back a lot of his public appearances and things like that. So I mean, it's surprising. There's a lot of speculation,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to go there. Until I know more, I can speculate all I want, but you know, I don't know. But then again, Jackson did a lot, and the job might have been too much for him because Jackson did the job of 50 people, and this is one position. They might need 2 people to do this job. It might be so big, but you just never know. Moving on. So there's a couple of sports stories before we get to talk to Noah. I want to mention to everybody. The first off, I don't, this happened in Budapest. It was the Women's Discus World Championship. And this story caught my eye. And I saw it on NBC News, and then I started looking up to see what happened. This woman's name, she's Hawaiian born. I know I'm gonna mess up her name. La Luga Saga Collins. And I know I just butchered it. But she is the first American to win the world's athletic championship for disc throwing. And
Wow.
on top of that, she is the first Black woman to win a world championship in disc throwing. So she's got 2 firsts, which I think is fantastic. But this also, she's not going to represent us in France for the Summer Olympics, which are coming up soon. So, but she did a very impressive. There's a documentary out there about the mental toughness that she went through to achieve this, and basically, trying to think about form, think about other stuff. She beat out the former world champion who won a couple of times. And basically, what she did, she just said, heck it, I'm just going to do this for fun, and just threw it. And she threw it enough that she beat everybody and stayed. She went from 12th to 5th to 1st.
Wow.
Yes. And it was like a long shot for all of them. Even to getting onto the team to go to the world championship, it was a long shot all the way. And she just had to battle this mental toughness. And she beat her personal best by 4 meters. She threw 69.49 meters to win the competition. I can't even throw that far. I'm lucky I could throw even 5 feet. So maybe even 2 feet, I should say. So, it's just yay for her. That's the first thing. And then
Okay.
second, Morgan Price. Everyone remember this name because eventually she's probably going to get on the women's gymnastic team. She is with Fisk University. And Fisk, we talked about it earlier, I think late last year. We talked about Fisk forming their own gymnastics team. Well, with Morgan Price, Fisk became the first HBCU gymnastics team to win the United States Gymnastic Collegiate National title. This is the title that launched, what's her name? Who's now a GOAT?
Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue.
I know. I hate that when I do this.
I hate that when
Oh
that
my God.
happens.
But anyway, so this is where everyone begins in gymnastics, especially when you're competing in the gymnastic world. Before you go on to world, regional, and world championships, you start with college competition. And she started her own path in this world by decommitting to the University of Arkansas, who has a very well-known gymnastics program, committing to Fisk University, which, really truly you don't do that. And she went on to win the collegiate title. So congratulations to her. We're looking forward to seeing more of her. Now, everybody's been reading about the WNBA.
Oh yeah.
The WNBA was very interesting. I didn't catch all of it, but it was impressive to see who got with who. But the salaries are so low compared to the NBA. They're making
Yeah,
millions. They're making millions, and they're making barely a tenth of what they're making off the millions. So, which I think is kind of sad.
it is.
But I think everyone, I think that's slowly going to go up as more people watch the WNBA because of the NCAA women's tournament. No, I should say their coverage of it, their viewership surpassed the men's viewership this year for the first time ever. So I think it's a little tilting here. So we'll see if it plays up in the professional world. But everyone who left their collegiate teams to go to the draft got picked up. So it's going to be interesting to see when we start seeing those teams play how they're going to do. So that's fantastic.
Oh
And
yeah.
last but not least, and thank you, Noah, for pointing this out to us. We want to congratulate Purcell Marion's Dee Alexander for picking the University of Cincinnati to play basketball for that. She is a 5-star player ranked number 6 nationally in the 2025 class by ESPN. And she was wanted not only by UC, but she was also wanted by Ohio State and University of Illinois. And she picked UC. So she's staying home. She's playing for the Bearcats. So we got somebody to root for the next basketball season. So I'm looking forward to it. And she helped lead Purcell Marion to their 3rd consecutive state title. So that says something right there.
That's
So
wild whenever
isn't
I
that
think about
wild?
that. Oh my
And Purcell
goodness.
Marion is ranked nationally number 15 in the season of the final Max Prep top 25 rankings. So that is a school that coaches are watching for players to come out of Purcell Marion, which I think is fantastic. So it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be a good time to watch sports next basketball season. So, and that is all the chocolate news I have for today.
All right. Well, thanks, Andrea. And we're going to move on to the second part of our show. And Andrea, I'll let you reintroduce our esteemed guest.
Noah O'Brien, who is the vice president of the West End Community Council. But he and 9 other residents of the West End are concerned about their neighborhood. They're concerned about who's developing in their neighborhood. They're concerned about affordable, what is the, how much affordable housing or low income housing that we have in that neighborhood. And because of this concern, these the neighborhood, these neighbors got together and they, with the help of a Texas firm, have filed a HUD complaint against the city of Cincinnati. And instead of me butchering, I'm going to have Noah explain exactly what is going on and why. Noah?
All right. Thanks for the introduction. One thing I would add to that is it didn't start necessarily as who's developing and what are they developing. It started with kids. Like we were on the scene with kids being shot, physically there in person, and asking, what is the root cause analysis that we can be performing to identify the variables that are impacting these statistical outcomes for these children? And that conversation took us in a lot of different directions. They took us to private meetings with Dr. Odell Owens, took us to private meetings with politicians, it took us to private meetings with nonprofit executive directors, and ultimately we identified a major variable is the illegal, discriminatory concentration of poverty in predominantly Black census tracts in Cincinnati. And if I don't know where you want to go from there, if you want me to start at the very beginning and kind of work our way to how we got here, or if you have any questions.
I would just say that give everyone an understanding of there's a lot of low income housing in the West End neighborhood, which has undergone a lot of change over the last, what, 60 years, with the highway coming through, people being uprooted, with low income housing being established with Stanley Row and other apartment complexes. There was Lincoln and Laurel Homes, which that was a nightmare. How did you all decide, okay, we need to do this?
I think the concentration part really woke everybody up as each year went by and we had just such negative outcomes for kids, and we saw what is the city doing through official action each year. What are they doing to address this? What funds are they putting and where? What are they approving? What are they not approving? And I'll start the story off with I I was at Cincinnati College Prep for a town hall about 2 weeks ago, and I was on the stage, and there was a panel. It had me, it had the father of Dominique Davis, the 11-year-old who was murdered late last year in the West End. It had Council Member Kearney, Member Albee, a few other people, Chris Griffin, Community Council President. And they had asked me, the organizer, a few times to be on the panel, and I didn't take him up on the offer because I wasn't necessarily comfortable with the idea of a march, thinking that we're going to accomplish something. And through a little more convincing, I agreed to do it. And Andrea, you were there and you heard what I said and you experienced the reaction to the audience.
Oh yeah, they were upset. I mean, the Inquirer article on this gives a very nice demographic view of where low income rentals are concentrated in the city of Cincinnati, and 12 neighborhoods out
Yeah,
of out of 52 neighborhoods, 12 neighborhoods have heavily concentrated low income rentals.
and so I given the reaction, and the place was packed, as you saw, absolutely
Yes.
packed. The balcony was packed, it was packed. And to get standing ovations from those people as I'm talking about what the politicians have done in the last 5 years in the exact census tract we were standing makes me in this conversation just kind of want to go back to some of the things I said at that town hall. So I'm just going to read how I started it off. There was a Facebook post from a Hayes Porter School teacher, which is the elementary school in the West End, very impoverished and very Black with a attendance perspective. And the teacher posted, and this is like I mentioned a couple years ago, he said, late last week, we got news no human parent or teacher wants to hear. Last night, one of your students was shot. Watching YouTube and playing video games in his room like any 10-year-old kid, a bullet went through his window and hit him. And he went on to say in this Facebook post, politicians and developers need to stop with concentrating poverty into as many poor people as they can fit into a city block, then turn an blind eye to the crime and violence that comes with that decision. And everyone, and I was kind of didn't know how the crowd would react. That was the first applause. Every single person in that auditorium applauded to that because they lived it. They understand it. That street where that kid got shot is a block from where the 11-year-old was murdered at the end of last year. That it's the same block that in the center of it, there's a whole strip of green space on Laurel Park, the half circle, and then going north up to Liberty. That's just green. Why is it green? Because that was supposed to be the market rate housing in the Hope 6 project for City West. But they never built that. They built every side street of income restricted or voucher based housing, and they never built the correct income mix for an equation that would produce positive outcomes. So people innately understood, like, yeah, this is where they concentrate one type of housing and one type of housing only. And so I then read from a business owner. We don't have a lot of businesses in the West End. We have one small store called Jet Inn, and the owner's name is Rob, and he's been very vocal about all of the crime and negative things that happen around his business. And so he wrote to community leaders in the city. He said, as expected, there was a shooting last night in the same spot that I've been telling the police. Nothing has been done since I talked to them. Then a couple months later, he said, hello, this is Rob again from Jet Inn. Things got better after the shooting and the police presence and drive-bys, but things are back to the same, if not worse. They are very comfortable with selling drugs and crime, and it seems no one cares. I've been in this business for 28 years in the same spot. And he goes on to say that seniors are scared to cross the street from City West over to his store. And I always shout out Andria for some of the work she does with just some investigating, following up on community complaints like this. And I always cite, when I talk about Rob, an email that Andria sent that said, a witness to the activity also noted that there's a 12-year-old boy used as a runner for the group. He has also been asked to leave the property of the convenience store. Other kids are used as runners as well, but the 12-year-old is the dominant runner. He has witnessed several activities conducted by the crowd and has watched two members of the crowd walk back and forth from an apartment in City West on Clark Street. And so as I'm telling the audience this, I ask them, you realize Jet Inn is in the same census tract that we're standing in right now in this auditorium. How many homeownership units are in this census tract? And everybody is nodding their head. They know what the answer is. 0. Not one homeownership unit in this census tract. You would think the city would want to encourage homeownership in minority Black neighborhoods. But what did the city do in the last 5 years? I asked the crowd. They all knew the new building that opened 3 years ago next to the public library in Ezra Charles, 821 Flats. It's a Tender Mercies building for individuals with a history of mental illness and chronic homelessness. There's 57 units. The police dispatch data last year, 162 police dispatch calls. Because what do you expect when you put the most vulnerable people in the city on top of an open air drug market, on top of a place with extreme violence, extreme segregation, and extreme poverty? But the city, they look the other way when the negative outcomes happen. They approve and they approve and they approve, but nobody talks about what happens afterwards. And so what happened the next year? The city supported with tax abatements and voted to approve Arts Apartments, which formerly was Richmond Village, 248 units. It used to have about 80 units that were voucher based and the rest were market rate. Well, the city incentivized converting the entire thing to 0 to 60 AMI, all 248 units. So what did that do to the people that made more than 60% AMI, which 60% AMI is lower than low income? For the city and HUD, low income is 60 to 80. I don't know how technical you want to get in this conversation, but this is lower than low income housing that they designated for all of these buildings. Well, Chris Griffin, the community council president's father, lived in a unit there for 27 years. Well, he lives in Roselawn now because he wasn't poor enough to meet the new low income requirements for it. And so as a community, we start now seriously asking questions. We have one of the most impoverished census tracts, and now you're kicking out over 24 Black families because they earn too much money. Like, what are we going to surround our kids with? What kind of socioeconomic mixing are they going to have? Like, what community are you designing for them? Because we know they're going to be a reflection of their environment statistically. And so what did the city do the next year? After they provided incentives to convert Richmond Village, the co-developers of Richmond Village sold the little strip of grass behind Richmond Village to the same developer that co-developed Richmond, the Arts Department's conversion, and they built Slater Hall, 62 units, more tender mercies for individuals with a history of mental illness and chronic homelessness. Well, we already saw the outcomes of the one they opened one block away on the other side of Richmond Village this past year, the year before. I mean, they're averaging over 100 police calls a year. Is this the right place for that? And that's what I asked the crowd. I said, when people get out of prison and they need a place to stay, we need to help provide that as a society. Is this the census tract for that? And everybody said no. They all knew. How can you do that many projects every single year when you don't support a single homeownership unit in the entire census tract? So now that census tract has 23 income restricted buildings, all 0 to 60 AMI, lower than low income, without a single homeowner. And you can hear what the sole business owner in that census tract, you can hear what he's saying. Is this producing the positive outcomes we want to see? Is this helping our children? Is this helping desegregate the city? And it's not just that census tract. The West End is 3 census tracts. So if you look at that Inquirer article, what the lawyers have done, and it took a year, they had to look at all the HUD data on where they gave money to the city to build income restricted housing. So they had to pull it for decades. And they had to look at the 222 census tracts in Cincinnati. And they had to cross-reference those 222 census tracts with the racial concentration per the census of all those census tracts. Then they had to further cross-reference it with the census poverty data for each of those census tracts. And so out of those 222 census tracts in Hamilton County, only 22 of them meet the HUD designation of racially, ethnically concentrated area of poverty. RECAP is the colloquial term. And so that acronym RECAP, there's only 22 census tracts out of 222. Of those 22 census tracts, the West End is 3. So some neighborhoods are multiple census tracts given their size. And so when you look at a neighborhood like the West End and the Inquirer article, I'll pull it up and quote from it. I mean, you're talking close to 80% of every home unit is income restricted, lower than low income. Does that sound like an inclusive community?
No.
Does that sound like the city's working to desegregate the city? And so then we look at the ancillary outcomes. We look at, okay, we have children getting shot. Well, why is that? We look at, and I take personally, Chris and I walk all of Lynn Street with the politicians, and we show them over 2,000 income restricted units. We can start at Page Tower all the way in the south and say 169 units. We can say Gateway, what they call Uptown, the two buildings next to it. That's 348 units income restricted. City West is obviously over 500. The census tract I mentioned, that Slater Hall, 62 units. Arts Apartments, 248 units. 821 Flats, 57 units. Stanley Row Towers A, B, low rise, and Liberty Street Apartment, 554 units. North of that, for 4 blocks, POA, Preservation of Affordable Housing, they own over 125 income restricted units. It's from one side to the other, it's all you see. And so as we walk them down Lynn Street, showing them all this, we take them to the empty storefronts in City West on Lynn Street in our business district. And I point through the window and I say, do you see that gravel on the floor? They built this over 20 effing years ago. And there hasn't been a single business that has occupied this space. Not a single job that a kid could get after school. Not a job at a pizza place. He can't even get a pizza for his birthday there. What kind of amenities are in the West End for a kid on their birthday? Tell me one place in the West End you can sit down at a table and be served a meal. Andrea, out down here, tell me one.
No, you can't. It's very in terms of what you see in other neighborhoods, you don't see it down there, except for maybe Ollie's Trolley, which is on the edge of the West End.
Ollie's
Um,
Trolley is a takeout window. They close very early. They service the lunch crowd at Sam Adams. Like it's not a actual restaurant you sit inside of and get served a meal.
no, you can't. I mean, that's the only thing closest to I mean, they have picnic tables, but other than that, you can't really sit down and do anything. I mean, there are market rate housing around the low income units in the West End, but it's not enough to bring it to where we need it to be. I mean, they started to, but at the end, I mean, originally part of the City West development, they were supposed to do market rate housing also on that land where the stadium stands. That was supposed to be housing. Now it's the stadium. So it's the West End has stayed a certain level of income
The
despite efforts, but
the average median income for the West End is $14,000. It's by design.
let me just say one thing. Let me just clear up one point to let everybody know. During the day, I'm a community engagement specialist that I work for the Community Partnering Center, which is a division of the Urban League. That's my day job. I do problem solving safety in neighborhoods. And then I do the podcast. This is my fun job. So I have a side gig. So I just want to let everybody know why you read an email from me talking about what I did, because not everyone knows what I do during the day. So I just wanted to throw that in real quick.
Shout out, great work during the day. We see you at community council meetings. You're accessible, so definitely shout you out when I can.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, I would just say how, we had a great talk right before that town hall forum. We talked about, during the peace walk, you were telling me all about this. I would just say, with all this information, what was the deciding moment that you 10 got together and said, we need to do this?
We have a community email thread of community leaders. And when I say community leaders, I'm talking bona fide community leaders. I'm talking Coach Larry Collins, West End president of the West End Reds, which is youth baseball, softball, t-ball, coach over 10 years. He's gone to playoffs, championships. Everyone knows him, runs a ton of kids through his program. Lisa Davis, Hamilton County Juvenile Corrections Manager, she's on it. Chris Griffin, Community Council President. He coached baseball at Taft. He coached Little Senators football. He coached West End Reds. I mean, I'm talking a lot of people that are involved in the community. We had a Hayes Porter elementary teacher actually jump on there. And all of these people shared with me concerns saying, I work for CPS or I work for Hamilton County. Like, we're not allowed to talk about negative things that could negatively impact the city or the county. They were very scared, but they said, this is too important. We have to speak. So we had this thread for several years. Every time a child got shot, we would bring the context of the shooting, information about it, the text threads, being on site, what we saw, and we would talk about the new income restricted project the city just funded. And it would just be continuous. And it was this cycle that never ended. It was a kid got shot. Then we talk about discriminatory housing. Kid gets shot, discriminatory housing, concentration. And so we got to the point where we met with AFTAB in his office, and AFTAB looked at Chris. We showed him the data. We showed them the Supreme Court case that our lawyers actually won before they were our lawyers. We said, we gave it to him ahead of time, and we said, we understand you're a lawyer and you can't answer this question in your professional capacity with the city or as a lawyer. Please be prepared to answer for us in your personal academic capacity. What do you think the intent of this Supreme Court case was and the precedent that was set and the underlying law behind it, which was the Fair Housing Act and also Civil Rights Act of 1964 with respect to concentrating poverty and segregating neighborhoods? And so we went into the meeting, and the mayor looked at Chris and he said, Chris, I'm going to be honest with you. You look like a token. And I almost jumped across the table, to be honest. I found that to be one of the most disrespectful things I've witnessed in my my late adult life. I mean, it was really a jarring moment for us that we don't have a voice. Like, we've provided community feedback to them for years on root cause analysis, on kids getting shot, and on the specific laws that the city is breaking, and they just don't care. And that really was where the point where we realized this is a waste of time. I mean, no offense to the community summit and all that. It's a waste of time. They literally will not listen to it. No, we could show up at 8,000 meetings and they will never take this seriously because there's political ramifications. White neighborhoods don't want income restricted housing. So it's going to keep going to the concentrated areas because they'll get voted out of office. And so there's some political realities. There's some people that don't have the academic understanding of root causes and some of the laws and what the intentions were. And so we were in this situation where we had wasted so much time begging the University of Cincinnati, begging CET, begging anybody that would listen. Could somebody please give a voice to what's happening? And I'll read, the Inquirer did a really good job on this past story covering everything. And they have on their, it's not part of their story, they have a separate part of their website that says meet the 10 West End complainants. And I'll just read what they have for a few of them, like Devin Williams. It says, for West End homeowner Devin Williams, 33, who's Black, a catalyst for joining the federal housing complaint was seeing open air drug markets near her home, a shooting on the corner of Freeman Avenue that left a local woman dead. This is her last ditch effort to affect change for her daughter's future. Quote, if kids grow up and this is all they see, it's just perpetuated, she said. Quote, that's why concentrated poverty is illegal in the first place, because it's literally creating a system that nobody who's in it can climb out of, end quote. And I know, Andrea, you're very involved with community councils and community engagement. Here's another one of the complainants, Mark Alexander, also Black. It says, quote, to see not only myself, but the community give so much data to the city council, and just to have them ignore it and continue their practices is just disheartening. And it has taken a lot of wind out of my sails. Why even do a community council when they're not going to listen? Another one that they have, Galen Gordon, who's quote surprised me the most. I mean, it was a lot of guts for him to say that. Also black, also West End resident, says Galen Gordon knows the city is at fault for not following federal law and discriminating against black people through concentrating low-income housing. As general manager of a downtown boutique hotel and board member of Visit Cincy, he's keen on the Cincinnati politics and business communities work behind the scenes. Quote, I don't like to automatically place blame, end quote, he said. Quote, somebody knows what's happening here, but do they care enough? So you have people from all walks of life. The complainants go from age 22 to 91. There's 8 black, 2 white. There's renters, there's homeowners. There is the most diverse group you will probably ever see come out of the West End. And I don't even want to say diverse because it's not, it's 80% black. You will have the most representative group that you'll see. And all of these people, they've tried. We've tried everything, and they just refuse to follow the law. Now, I want to just get into, and I know we've gone a long time, but there's a lot of laws that are being broken. And the Inquirer article did an excellent job. The Inquirer, they reached out to lawyers across. They listed the most precedent cases for this type of discrimination, and actually reached out to the lawyers that won those cases. So they talked to one lawyer named Michael Allen on the East Coast who won a massive case in Westchester County where they were lying, saying they were using HUD funds to desegregate housing when they actually weren't. And they had a multi-million-dollar settlement. They had to put $50 million in a fund to build income-restricted housing in white neighborhoods. He read all their data, fact-checked it, all the accusations and violations of law. That's why that Inquirer article was so strongly written when they talk about the laws being broken. I'll just read quickly what they said about that, and they have a title, and it's called, Is This Illegal? It says, not only could the city be held accountable for violating Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits the use of federal program fund to discriminate based on race, but it could also face violations within the Fair Housing Act. In addition, the city could duly be condemned for not following multiple federal regulations, including enacting ordinances, policies, and permitting rules that restrict or deny housing opportunities because of race. And so when I was mentioning those 222 census tracts, over 80% of every income restricted unit the city has ever done is in half of those 22 racially ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. That there is no defense in court. When you walk into court and you have a legal obligation to affirmatively further fair housing under the Fair Housing Act and under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, you have an obligation to undo historic segregation patterns. And you walk into court and you say, yes, we put over 80% and and just half of the few racially ethnically concentrated areas of poverty in our city. There is no defense.
I mean, this is also, I mean, in this day and age, it's an incredible complaint that you have sent to HUD. You know, what you've told me about your attorneys is incredible. And I would say it's going to be interesting to see what happens with
I'll
all
say,
of this.
yeah, I haven't mentioned it. Our attorneys, the way we found them, I mean, it's not normal for some random peon West End residents to have lawyers from Texas fighting the city for one of the largest civil rights cases in the Midwest in a long time. And the reason that came to be was these lawyers won at the United States Supreme Court for the most precedent-setting case of the Fair Housing Act in the last 40 years. And their precedent-setting case was very important because the Supreme Court ruled in their case that you do not have to prove that the city intentionally discriminated. All you have to prove is that the outcome was discriminatory of their actions. And in this case, the data is black and white. I want to mention one other aspect of the law, which we didn't know until we started getting into the weeds. The city actually made it illegal in their own ordinance to concentrate poverty in poor Black neighborhoods. I'm going to read from the ordinance that was passed in 2002 and quote, the city will encourage the development of lease to own housing to assist low-income renters to become homeowners. The city will not support additional low-income rental housing development in areas that have a concentration of existing low-income housing. Also says the city will endeavor to develop a balance between market rate rental and ownership units and low-income rental units. Well, they doubled just in the last little over decade the number of income restricted units in the West End. So they obviously, that census tract where I named the 23 buildings in a row they just added in the last 5 years, there's not a single home ownership unit. So they're violating their own law. But here's where it gets interesting. The reason they passed this law was to comply with the federal government when they received the HUD funds for housing. The same law under what I just read you, Section 2, this is the local city ordinance. The council reassures the United States Secretary of Housing and Urban Development of full compliance by the city of Cincinnati with regulations of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, effectuating Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and applicable executive orders. This ordinance is they passed it to inform HUD that they're doing these things to comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They lied. That is a lie to HUD. If you are telling HUD that's what you're doing with the money, you are lying. And it's against the law to do that. So,
well, I think that was also passed because they needed that on the books. Because that isn't that when the Hope Choice, the Hope Choice grant was being handed out, or Choice 6 was
Hope
being
6.
built,
Hope
City
6.
West was being built at
Yeah,
that time.
so for that Hope 6 grant, they had to do some introspection. They had to look at everything that was going on and they had to say, okay, we have to do Hope 6 better. We have to comply with all of this stuff where historically it's not unique to Cincinnati. I mean, think about like very racist, the most racist place you can think of. Think of like a Alabama, Huntsville, where you would have if there's white control of the government, they're going to say, we don't want Black people to have housing choice. We want you to only live over here. And so there was this problem historically across the country. And that's why the HUD was so specific on if you use our funds, it has to be in furtherance of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You can't have disparate impact on minority communities is the legal term. And so when you do concentrate, it gives that disparate impact. So the city going through Hope 6, going through just that level of introspection, hey, we need to be better. And so here they actually did the right thing and they passed this ordinance to more strictly govern how these fundings were allocated. My question to you is, does the data show they followed it?
According to the Inquirer article, no. So I mean, it's something that we're gonna have to talk about more about and see the impact of. I know it takes time for the HUD complaint to go through the process, so it's gonna be interesting to see what the outcome is going to be. And we're definitely going to have you back because unfortunately we're running out of time.
And I'll say the HUD administrative complaint is a nice to have. It's not a have to have. The Inquirer article made it very clear at the end. They quoted our lawyers that said, regardless of what happens with HUD, we're confident this can switch to federal court in an instant. And so this is just the first step in a very long journey that could be 6 years of litigation. The city could decide they want to do the right thing and settle it and look at how they do their allocations and reform it. Or this could go 6-7 years, and I'm more than happy to come back and give you updates or other complainants. Like I said, there's 10 of us, so
definitely. I mean, we definitely will have you back as as updates occur and go through that. I mean, it's the West End is a unique neighborhood. They do have some home ownership, older home ownership, but in terms of any new development for home ownership has not occurred within the last, what, 10, 20 years?
20, but to scale, even the existing home ownership is dwarfed in comparison to the concentration of income restricted rental units that they've added over the past 20 years.
Right,
And
because if the FC Cincinnati Stadium had not been built, the Wilton Star Stadium would not have been built, and instead, City Rama would have had their City Rama on that spot where the stadium now sits,
right,
because that would have been new. Which
which would still only be about 40. That was only about 41 home ownership units. So when you
right,
look at what the city did in that census tract that we talked about earlier, that's 248 units just in the past 5 years.
yeah,
So even if they did that, it's a drop in the bucket to what the city's still actively concentrating.
right, but
So
it's especially for what the neighborhood needs in terms of what every other neighborhood has in terms of a business, a working business district that's thriving. The West End is lacking in a lot.
yeah,
Um,
and the solution is, well, now like then you create this cycle where like the market can't bring those amenities because by design you artificially decrease the average median income below $20,000. And so then you have to say, well, the CDCs they're the only hope, they're the savior, so we'll pump money to them. But it's still just this self-fulfilling prophecy where you've interfered so much with just the natural dynamics of what an integrated community is supposed to be that suddenly now the city has their fingerprints on everything, which isn't sustainable long term, and it's just proven to be a failed policy. I will mention before we go, I was very surprised last night. We had which Andrea, you gone to our West End Community Council meetings. We have some very lively meetings. We have lots of
yes.
people with lots of different opinions. And we had a vote last night. We talked about the HUD administrative complaint because it was our first meeting since it was filed. And the vote to support it was unanimous. And as you know from our meetings, there's normally at least one or two people that'll
Yes.
know. It was unanimous. And we also voted to oppose connected communities. And that was also unanimous. And I think what's important to mention on connected communities, we have connected communities obviously focuses, there's a heavy focus on the transit corridors. And so when you look at a map, those corridors are very skewed towards being minority neighborhoods, and they're very skewed to being very poor. And what Connected Communities does is it says, hey, if you're a low income provider, we'll give you extra incentives to build in these zones. Well, the problem is the city filed with HUD in their consolidated plan, which is basically their promise to HUD that they're furthering fair housing. They have quote the in they have the Metro bus service and family poverty rate map illustrates a correlation to low-income poverty rates residing along the bus stops, end quote. 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan, page 68. So what Connected Communities does is it disproportionately targets these predominantly Black segregated census tracts on these bus routes with bonus incentives. And so here we are saying, hey, city, you are illegally segregating. You can't put over 80% of the income restricted housing in a few poor Black neighborhoods. You have to incentivize it going other places. And so here, what does the city do? So here they're further incentivizing it. And what do they exclude in connected communities? A whole bunch of white neighborhoods. And what they did was very creative. They said, well, we'll put the business districts, a block or two, in a couple of these white neighborhoods. And so then we can say, look, we're also doing it those other places. The problem is it doesn't steer affordable housing to those white census tracts in those white business districts. It leaves it to the market forces to say, well, you could do denser market rate in those white neighborhoods, and you can do denser incentivized low income in the poor Black neighborhoods that are already saturated with over 80% of that type of housing. And so the fact that it excludes all these white neighborhoods from any of it, that should be the first red flag. The second red flag should be, whoa, look at how dominant these poor transit route corridors are for further incentives to further concentrate the poverty just denser and across a larger line. It's very, very problematic. I have a feeling had the HUD administrative complaint gotten filed earlier, they definitely wouldn't have proposed it in the way it's proposed now because it's blatantly discriminatory.
Well, we're going to have to get someone from Connected Communities on to talk about it, and we'll definitely do that. I want to say thank you, Noah, for coming to talk to us. We'll look forward to your updates.
Thanks.
And oh, definitely. John?
Yeah, thanks for coming on though. I certainly I was aware of this issue, but not to that. I Let me rephrase.
It's
I was
deep.
aware. Oh yeah, it is
It's
deep.
it's a deep issue. There's a lot of legalese involved with it, and Noah does a good job explaining it, and using the article that helps to explain it as well is fantastic. But I mean, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of contemporary issues going on. So there's a lot of economic forces and political forces all involved in all of this. So it's going to be interesting to see what the update's going to be later on. So
Yeah.
And this is the lens that any layman that doesn't understand, that doesn't know all the laws, they can't cite Civil Rights Act of 1964, Fair Housing Act. All you have to do, any listener that's listening to this, do white neighborhoods want low income housing in their neighborhoods? And let me make this important point that the Inquirer article failed to include. The city files what's called a fair housing assessment every few years. And in it, they have to break down the racial concentration of the people that are using the income restricted housing and voucher-based housing. Well, if you look at the city's current one on file, over 90% of the people using this type of housing are Black. And white neighborhoods, they don't want a whole bunch of poor Black housing getting added to their white neighborhoods. That's a fact. No one can dispute that. Everyone knows in their gut that that is a fundamental racist part of the world that we live in. And so, what does the city do? The city's supposed to work to undo that, but they have only put that particular type of housing that's utilized by Black people only in Black neighborhoods. They've removed housing choice. They've made it to where they say there's a whole bunch of people that can pick where they live. Like, hey, I want to go live in, I think Madeira schools are good. And so we're having a kid, we want to go there. There's a whole bunch of vulnerable people in our city that don't have a housing choice because of the discriminatory policy of the city of Cincinnati, removing that choice from them, forcing them into segregated neighborhoods. It's a statistical fact. It's just life. It's empirical. It's anecdotal. You can't escape the reality. So just always think to yourself through that lens of, do white neighborhoods want it? And if they don't, is it okay? Then is that an excuse, a reason, a rationale to only put it in Black neighborhoods? And the answer is no. That's called discrimination, and it's a violation of the federal law if you're using federal funds to do it.
All right. Well, that's it for today's show. I want to thank Andrea again for for the chocolate news and bringing on Noah. Greatly appreciated.
you're welcome.
And remember, folks, you can find more information about today's topics and past podcast episodes at www.thecincinnatiherald.com, the Sesh newsletter, or on our social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Threads. And make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. Our podcast is on Apple, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Amazon, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. I'm John Alexander Reese.
And I'm Andrea Carter.
And have a good day.